The wheelchair-bound elderly man started choking violently on his medication just as the elegant dinner party reached its peak. While Manhattan's elite stood frozen in horror, a young woman in a simple uniform rushed forward without hesitation. Her hands moved with surgical precision, clearing his airway in seconds and stabilizing his breathing with techniques that clearly weren't learned in any waitressing manual. "Who the hell are you?" demanded Victoria Thornfield, the billionaire's wife, her diamond-encrusted fingers trembling as she clutched her pearl necklace. The entire room fell silent, 50 pairs of elite eyes now focused on the mysterious caregiver who had just saved Theodore Thornfield's life. Sofia Reyes, 28 years old, had spent the last 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible. After serving 18 months in federal prison for a crime she didn't commit, she had learned that sometimes survival meant hiding in plain sight. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now working as a private caregiver for the father of the very man whose testimony had destroyed her life. "I'm Mr. Thornfield's evening caregiver," Sofia replied calmly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. She avoided looking directly at Alexander Thornfield, the tech mogul whose lies had sent her to prison while he built his empire on the medical technology she had actually invented. 3 years ago, Dr. Sofia Reyes had been a rising star in biomedical engineering, her groundbreaking work on neural rehabilitation devices promising to revolutionize treatment for paralysis patients. Her research partner and fiancé, Dr. Michael Chun, had been the only person she trusted with her life's work. Until the day FBI agents showed up at her lab with a warrant for corporate espionage and patent theft. The evidence against her had been overwhelming: encrypted files on her personal computer, suspicious financial transactions, even forged communications with foreign competitors. Michael had tearfully testified that he'd discovered her betrayal, presenting himself as the heartbroken partner who'd been deceived by the woman he loved. Alexander Thornfield, CEO of Meditech Innovations, had been the key witness who claimed she tried to sell his company's secrets to overseas competitors. His testimony had been so convincing, so detailed, that even her own lawyer had suggested a plea deal. Now, as she helped Theodore settle back into his wheelchair, Sofia caught Alexander's eye for the first time in 3 years. The flicker of recognition was immediately replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. Good. Let him wonder how much she remembered about that night in Central Park when she'd overheard his phone call, or why she'd really been at the lab so late that evening when the evidence was planted. "Remarkable technique," murmured Dr. Harrison, the family physician, studying Sofia with newfound interest. "Where exactly did you train in emergency medical response?" Sofia's smile was perfectly polite, perfectly innocent. "You learn a lot of useful skills when you're determined to help people, doctor. Sometimes life teaches you things that textbooks never could." What the room full of New York's wealthiest didn't realize was that Sofia Reyes wasn't just any caregiver. She was a woman with a photographic memory, advanced degrees in biomedical engineering and computer science, and most importantly, 18 months of prison time to plan the perfect revenge against the men who had stolen not just her freedom, but her life's work. Alexander excused himself from the dinner party early that night, his face pale and drawn. As his limousine pulled away from the Thornfield estate, he pulled out his phone with shaking hands. The first text was to his head of security: "Run a complete background check on Sofia Reyes. Everything. Now." The second text was to Michael Chun: "We have a problem. She's back, and she's closer than you think." What Alexander didn't know was that Sofia had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment, the chance to get close enough to destroy both men who had betrayed her. And working as his paralyzed father's caregiver was just the beginning of a plan so intricate, so devastating, that even she sometimes marveled at its beautiful simplicity. In that moment of life-saving heroism, no one could have imagined that the quiet caregiver held secrets that would soon tear apart one of America's most powerful families. If stories of betrayal and justice inspire you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because Sofia's journey from prisoner to mastermind is just beginning, and the truth she's hiding will shock you to your core. The security report arrived on Alexander's desk at 6 a.m. the next morning, but the contents made his blood run cold. Sofia Reyes had indeed been released from federal prison 18 months ago after serving her full sentence. What the report didn't say, but what terrified Alexander most, was how she had managed to secure a position caring for his father. Background checks, references, certifications, everything appeared legitimate, almost too perfect. "This can't be a coincidence," Alexander muttered, scrolling through the documents on his tablet while his morning coffee grew cold. His father's condition required highly specialized care, and the agency that had provided Sofia's services was one of the most exclusive in Manhattan. the kind that catered only to wealthy families who demanded discretion and expertise. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the medical wing of the Thornfield mansion, Sofia was helping Theodore with his morning physical therapy routine. The old man's eyes followed her every movement with sharp intelligence, despite his body's limitations. Unlike his son and daughter-in-law, Theodore had never treated her as invisible. "You saved my life last night," he managed to say through his speech therapy device, the words slow but clear. "Victoria was ready to let me choke rather than risk breaking a nail." Sofia smiled genuinely for the first time in days. "Your son seemed more concerned about who I was than whether you were breathing." Theodore's laugh was barely audible, but his eyes twinkled with mischief. "Alexander has always been paranoid about strangers. Comes from having too much money and too many enemies." He paused, studying Sofia's face. "Though I suspect you're not quite the stranger he thinks you are." The observation was casual, but Sofia felt her pulse quicken. Theodore Thornfield hadn't built his fortune by missing important details. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: Central Park, North Meadow, 2 p.m. "Come alone, or your parole officer gets an interesting call about falsified employment documents." Sofia's hands trembled slightly as she read the message. Michael. Even after 3 years, he still knew exactly which buttons to push, which threats would force her compliance. The falsified employment documents were his insurance policy, evidence planted in her file that would send her straight back to prison if discovered. "Everything all right, dear?" Theodore asked, noticing her distraction. "Just scheduling your afternoon medications, Mr. Thornfield." The lie came easily, a survival skill honed during 18 months of navigating prison politics where showing weakness could be fatal. But Theodore wasn't fooled. "Sofia, I may be paralyzed, but I'm not blind. Someone is threatening you." The simple statement of support nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. When was the last time someone had shown her genuine concern without wanting something in return? "I can handle it," she said quietly. "I'm sure you can. But you shouldn't have to handle it alone." Theodore's device produced the words slowly, but each one carried weight. "My son may be many things, but he's not a coward. And he has resources that most people can only dream of." Sofia shook her head. "Your son is part of the problem, Mr. Thornfield. He's not going to help me." Then maybe it's time he learned the truth about what kind of man he's been protecting. 2 hours later, Sofia stood in Central Park's North Meadow, watching Michael Chun approach with the same confident stride that had once made her heart race with love instead of fear. He looked exactly the same: perfectly styled hair, expensive suit, that charming smile that had convinced her to trust him with everything she had worked for. "Sofia." His voice was warm, familiar, as if they were meeting for a pleasant lunch instead of what amounted to extortion. "You look good. Prison suits you, apparently. What do you want, Michael?" Sofia kept her voice steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "The same thing I've always wanted. Your complete disappearance from my life." He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of documents. "These employment records show some interesting discrepancies in your background check. The kind that would violate your parole terms and send you back to finish a much longer sentence." Sofia studied the forged documents, noting Michael's thoroughness. Even now, 3 years later, he was still covering his tracks, still anticipating potential threats to his carefully constructed empire. "So this is what success looks like for you? Blackmailing women you've already destroyed." "You destroyed yourself, Sofia. I just helped the process along." Michael's mask slipped slightly, revealing the cold calculation beneath his practiced charm. "You were always too idealistic, too naive. You actually believed that innovation mattered more than market positioning, that being right mattered more than being profitable. I believed that partnerships were built on trust instead of theft." Michael's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Trust? You want to talk about trust? You were planning to take our research to Thornfield Industries behind my back. I have the emails to prove it." The accusation hit Sofia like a physical blow. After 3 years, she had almost forgotten about those emails, the ones she had drafted but never sent, exploring the possibility of licensing their technology to other companies if Michael continued to refuse her suggestions for ethical applications. Emails that had been used as evidence of her betrayal during the trial. Those were theoretical inquiries, And you know it, Sofia said. I never sent them, never made contact with any competitors. But you thought about it. You considered betraying our partnership, our relationship, everything we had built together. Michael stepped closer, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he had once used to whisper promises of forever. So don't pretend to be the innocent victim, Sofia. You're just upset that I was better at the game than you were. What Michael didn't know was that Sofia had spent 18 months in federal prison learning from women who had perfected survival into an art form. She had learned that the only way to beat someone at their own game was to change the rules entirely. You're right, Michael, Sofia said quietly, her sudden capitulation clearly surprising him. I was naive. I did trust too easily. But 18 months in prison taught me something important. What's that? Michael's smile was triumphant, already savoring what he assumed was her surrender. Sofia's own smile was cold, predatory, nothing like the woman who had once loved him. I learned that the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose. And thanks to you, I lost everything that mattered to me 3 years ago. For the first time in their conversation, Michael looked uncertain. Sofia, what are you saying? I'm saying that your blackmail only works if I care about going back to prison. But here's the thing, Michael, I've already survived the worst you could do to me. I've already lost my career, my reputation, my freedom, my future. What exactly do you think you can take from me now that I haven't already learned to live without? The fear that flickered across Michael's face was quickly replaced by anger. You think you're clever? You think working for Alexander Thornfield gives you some kind of protection? He doesn't even know who you really are. Not yet, Sofia agreed. But he's about to learn. Along with everyone else who matters. As Sofia walked away, leaving Michael standing alone in the meadow, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the intoxicating rush of taking control of her own destiny. Michael and Alexander had spent so long underestimating her, treating her like a victim to be managed rather than a threat to be feared. They were about to discover that the woman who had survived federal prison was nothing like the naive scientist they had destroyed. And their perfectly constructed lies were about to meet an opponent who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain from watching their world burn. Sofia returned to the Thornfield mansion that evening with a new sense of purpose burning in her chest. The confrontation with Michael had crystallized something essential. She was no longer running from her past, but racing toward her future. A future where both Michael Chun and Alexander Thornfield would finally pay for what they had stolen from her. You look different, Theodore observed as Sofia helped him with his evening medication routine. His keen eyes studied her face with the sharp intelligence that had built his fortune. Stronger somehow. Prison changes people, Mr. Thornfield. Some of us come out weaker, others come out dangerous. Sofia's honesty surprised even herself, but something about Theodore's genuine concern had cracked through her carefully maintained facade. And which category do you fall into? Sofia met his gaze directly. I guess we'll find out. Theodore was quiet for a long moment, then reached for his communication device. Sofia, I need to tell you something about my son. Alexander wasn't always the man he is today. What followed was a revelation that Sofia hadn't expected. Theodore began explaining how Alexander had been groomed from childhood to take over the family empire, how the pressure had slowly poisoned his moral compass, how he had started making increasingly questionable business decisions in pursuit of profits over people. I know he's done something to hurt you, Theodore said finally. I can see it in the way he looks at you, the way he panics when you're in the room. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Sofia felt tears threaten her carefully maintained composure. Your son helped send me to prison for crimes I didn't commit. He stole my life's work and built his reputation on my innovations. What exactly do you think I should do about it? I think, Theodore said slowly, that you should let me help you prove it. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline Sofia hadn't dared to hope for. Why would you help me destroy your own son? Because I'd rather have a son who faces the consequences of his actions than one who builds his success on lies. Theodore's voice grew stronger, more determined. And because I've spent too many years watching Alexander become someone I don't recognize. Over the next 3 days, Theodore proved to be an invaluable ally. His access to Alexander's private files, his knowledge of the family's business dealings, and his connections throughout the tech industry provided Sofia with resources she could never have accessed alone. More importantly, he believed her story without requiring proof, offering the kind of unconditional support she hadn't experienced since before her arrest. Meanwhile, Alexander's paranoia was reaching dangerous levels. He had hired a team of private investigators to dig deeper into Sofia's background, convinced that her presence in his father's life wasn't coincidental. What he found only deepened his panic. Sofia Reyes was indeed the brilliant scientist he had helped destroy, and she was now living in his home with unrestricted access to his vulnerable father. "She's playing some kind of long game," Alexander told Michael during a tense phone call. "First she gets close to my father, saves his life to gain his trust, and now she's probably poisoning him against me." "Then get rid of her," Michael replied coldly. "Fire her, have her arrested for parole violations, whatever it takes. We can't let her destabilize everything we've built." But Alexander's attempts to dismiss Sofia hit unexpected roadblocks. Theodore had quietly transferred her employment contract to his personal staff, making her dismissal require his approval rather than Alexander's. When Alexander tried to report falsified information to her parole officer, Theodore's lawyers intervened with documentation proving Sofia's employment was legitimate and above board. "She's turned my own father against me," Alexander raged during another call with Michael. "He's protecting her like she's family instead of hired help." What neither man realized was that Sofia had been documenting every conversation, every threat, every attempt to sabotage her newfound stability. The small recording device hidden in her uniform captured Alexander's increasingly frantic phone calls, while the security cameras she had strategically repositioned during her cleaning duties provided visual evidence of his suspicious behavior. But Sofia's most powerful weapon wasn't technology, it was information. During her months of caring for Theodore, she had gained access to financial records, patent filings, and business correspondence that painted a damning picture of Alexander's rise to prominence. More importantly, she had discovered evidence of other victims, other innovators whose work had been stolen and whose lives had been destroyed to fuel Meditech Innovation's rapid expansion. The breakthrough came when Theodore handed her a locked filing cabinet key he had kept hidden for years. "Alexander thinks I don't know about his backup files," Theodore explained. "But I've always been more aware of his activities than he realized." Inside the cabinet, Sofia found the original patent applications, the ones that clearly showed her as the primary inventor on the neural rehabilitation technology that had made Meditech millions. She found correspondence between Alexander and Michael detailing their plan to frame her for corporate espionage. Most damning of all, she found evidence of a systematic pattern of theft and fraud spanning multiple victims over several years. As Sofia photographed each document, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her arrest: hope. Not just for her own vindication, but for the possibility of preventing Alexander and Michael from destroying other innocent lives. But her enemies weren't done underestimating her capabilities. Michael's next move was as predictable as it was cruel. He contacted Sofia's former colleagues, spreading rumors that she was mentally unstable, dangerous, possibly planning some kind of violent revenge against the people who had rightfully exposed her crimes. The Whisper campaign was designed to isolate Sofia, to ensure that even if she tried to expose the truth, no one would believe her. What Michael didn't realize was that several of her former colleagues had always suspected the charges against her were fabricated, and his sudden contact only confirmed their suspicions. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Sofia's former research partner, reached out through encrypted channels. "I never believed you were guilty," she wrote. "If you're ready to fight back, you're not alone." As Sofia read the message, she realized that her plan had evolved beyond simple revenge. She wasn't just going to expose Alexander and Michael, she was going to systematically dismantle the empire they had built on stolen innovations and destroyed lives. And she was going to do it with the support of the victims they thought they had silenced forever. The game was no longer about survival. It was about justice, methodically planned and perfectly executed. Alexander and Michael had spent 3 years believing they had won, but they were about to discover that the woman they had underestimated was now armed with evidence, allies, and most dangerously, nothing left to lose. What they couldn't have imagined was that their own arrogance would become the weapon Sofia used to destroy them, and that the father Alexander had taken for granted would become the key to his own downfall. The execution of Sofia's plan began at exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when Alexander's world started collapsing in spectacular fashion. He was in the middle of a board meeting with potential investors when his assistant burst through the conference room doors, her face pale with panic. "Mr. Thornfield, there's been a development. The FBI is here with warrants, and there are reporters outside the building," she stammered, holding up her phone to show news alerts flooding the screen. "Someone leaked internal documents to the press." Alexander's blood turned to ice as he read the headlines scrolling across every major news outlet. Tech mogul built empire on stolen patents. Meditech CEO framed innocent woman for corporate espionage. Exclusive. Prison documents reveal systematic patent theft conspiracy. But the real devastation came when Alexander opened his email to find a message from his father, sent to every board member, investor, and business partner in his contact list. The subject line read, "A father's confession, the truth about my son." The email contained everything: Theodore's detailed account of discovering Sofia's true identity, copies of the original patent application showing her as the primary inventor, financial records proving the systematic theft of intellectual property, and most damning of all, audio recordings of Alexander's panicked phone calls with Michael discussing how to neutralize the Sofia problem. "This can't be happening," Alexander whispered, his hand shaking as he scrolled through page after page of evidence that Sofia had methodically compiled over months of living in his home. Every conversation he thought was private, every document he believed was secure, every moment of arrogance when he'd underestimated the woman serving his father's breakfast had been carefully documented and preserved. Meanwhile, across town, Michael Chun was experiencing his own version of hell. FBI agents had raided Pinnacle Financial at dawn, seizing servers, files, and financial records. The company's investors were pulling out in real time as news of the fraud scandal spread, and Michael's carefully constructed reputation was disintegrating by the hour. The cruelest twist came when Michael realized that Sofia had been 10 steps ahead of him from the moment she'd taken the job with Theodore. Every threat he'd made, every attempt to silence her, had been recorded and documented. The falsified employment records he'd used to blackmail her? She'd known about them all along and had gathered evidence proving they were fabricated. "She played us," Michael said during a desperate phone call with Alexander, both men now under federal investigation. 3 years of thinking we'd won, and she was planning this the entire time. Back at the Thornfield mansion, Sofia was helping Theodore with his physical therapy when the news broke on every television channel. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't hiding her emotions. Tears of relief, vindication, and overwhelming gratitude streamed down her face as she watched her tormentors finally face consequences for their actions. "Are you satisfied?" Theodore asked gently, watching his son's empire crumble on the screen. "No," Sofia said quietly, "but I'm finally free." The press conference that afternoon was Sofia's moment of total triumph. Standing behind a podium with her legal team and Dr. Jennifer Walsh, she faced a room full of reporters and cameras, no longer the invisible caregiver or the defeated ex-convict, but a brilliant scientist reclaiming her place in the world. "For 3 years, I lived in the shadows while the men who destroyed my life profited from my stolen work," Sofia began, her voice strong and clear. "But today, the truth speaks louder than their lies." She detailed every aspect of Alexander and Michael's conspiracy, presenting evidence so comprehensive and damning that even their most expensive lawyers couldn't dispute it. Financial records showing how Meditech's profits had directly correlated with the timing of stolen patents. Communications proving premeditation in framing Sofia for crimes she never committed. Testimony from other victims who had been silenced by the same tactics used against her. But Sofia's master stroke came when she announced that she hadn't just gathered evidence of past crimes, she had prevented future ones. Working with Theodore, she had identified other inventors whose work Alexander and Michael were in the process of stealing, allowing the FBI to intercept the thefts before they could be completed. "Justice isn't just about punishment," Sofia concluded, looking directly into the camera. "It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." As Alexander and Michael were led away in handcuffs that evening, their faces captured on every news channel and social media platform, Sofia felt something she hadn't experienced since before her arrest: peace. Not the hollow satisfaction of revenge, but the profound relief of justice finally served. The 2 men who had stolen her life's work, destroyed her reputation, and sent her to prison for crimes they had committed were finally facing the consequences they had avoided for so long. And Sofia Reyes, no longer a victim, no longer invisible, was ready to reclaim the brilliant future they had tried to steal from her. The woman who had saved Theodore Thornfield's life had ultimately saved her own, transforming from a broken ex-convict into the architect of the most spectacular corporate takedown in recent memory. 2 years later, Dr. Sofia Reyes stood in the gleaming lobby of Reyes Biomedical Technologies, her name etched in platinum letters across the wall behind the reception desk. The company she had built from the ground up was now valued at over $200 million, specializing in the exact neural rehabilitation technology that Alexander and Michael had stolen from her years earlier. The irony was perfect. While her former tormentors sat in federal prison serving 15-year sentences for corporate espionage and fraud, Sofia had used the settlement money from their convictions to create something far greater than what they had destroyed. Her innovations were now helping paralyzed patients around the world regain mobility, fulfilling the dream that had driven her since her early days in biomedical research. Theodore Thornfield had become more than an ally. He had become like a father to her, investing heavily in her new company and serving as chairman of the board. His own recovery had been remarkable, with Sofia's advanced neural stimulation devices helping him regain limited movement in his hands for the first time in a decade. "I always knew you were special," Theodore said during the company's second anniversary celebration, addressing a room full of investors, employees, and medical professionals. "But I never imagined that saving my life that night would lead to you saving thousands of others." The guest list included many of Sofia's former colleagues who had reached out after her vindication, Dr. Jennifer Walsh among them, who now served as chief research officer. They had formed a coalition of scientists dedicated to protecting intellectual property rights and preventing the kind of systematic theft that had once destroyed Sofia's life. Michael Chen's empire had crumbled completely. Pinnacle Financial was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to the numerous victims of his fraud schemes. He had lost everything: his company, his reputation, his freedom, and most devastatingly, the grudging respect he had once commanded in the tech industry. Fellow inmates knew him as the man who had stolen from a woman and sent her to prison for his own crimes, a distinction that made his prison experience particularly difficult. Alexander Thornfield's fall had been even more spectacular. Meditech Innovations had been liquidated, its stolen patents returned to their rightful inventors, many of whom joined Sofia in a class action lawsuit that resulted in one of the largest corporate fraud settlements in history. His reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that even after serving his sentence, no reputable company would hire him. He had become a cautionary tale in business schools, a perfect example of how arrogance and greed could lead to complete ruin. But Sofia's greatest triumph wasn't financial or professional, it was personal. She had proven that someone could lose everything, survive the worst kind of betrayal, and emerge not just intact but stronger than before. Prison had taught her resilience, but Theodore's faith had taught her that she deserved better than mere survival. She deserved to thrive. The woman who had once saved a choking man's life had ultimately saved herself, transforming from a broken ex-convict into one of the most respected innovators in biomedical technology. Her story had become legend in Silicon Valley, the brilliant scientist who had turned her enemies' arrogance into their downfall, who had used their own father as an ally in their destruction. During interviews, Sofia often spoke about the importance of never underestimating someone who has nothing left to lose. "The greatest mistake my enemies made," she would say, "was believing that destroying my past meant they could control my future. They forgot that sometimes, losing everything is exactly what someone needs to discover their true strength." Her company's mission statement, displayed prominently in every office, read, "Innovation belongs to those who create it, not those who steal it." Below it, in smaller text, was a quote from Sofia herself: "The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's becoming so successful that their crimes against you become footnotes in your triumph." Today, Sofia Reyes is not just a survivor of corporate fraud, she is a pioneer whose work continues to change lives around the world. Her neural rehabilitation devices have helped thousands of paralyzed patients regain movement, and her story has inspired a new generation of scientists to protect their intellectual property and stand up against corporate bullies. As for Alexander and Michael, they learned too late that the quiet caregiver they had underestimated possessed something far more dangerous than anger or hatred. She had intelligence, patience, and the unwavering support of people who believed in justice. Their downfall wasn't just complete, it was entirely of their own making, orchestrated by a woman they had foolishly believed they had already defeated. Sofia's journey from prisoner to pioneer proves that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding failure, but from rising above it with grace, intelligence, and an unshakable belief that truth will ultimately prevail. If this story of justice and redemption inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of people who refuse to let their enemies write the final chapter of their lives.